listening to BooTalk with your host, Hugh Perry. Now allow us to dive even further into this week's BooTV theme.
Welcome back to BooTalk, where today I'm here alone. I had plans for others to join me, and we were going to talk about some stuff that we're probably going to talk about eventually again. I was going to have a couple haunters and former haunters here with me to talk about some haunt stories, but some plans fell through. We're going to continue on because I need to get these out. So I've decided what I'm going to do instead of that, and we're going to push back that topic for a later date. And this now is officially BooTalk, episode 1. I know it's not what I originally wanted it to be, but hell, we're fucking doing it. We're doing it live. Let's get into this. I decided what I'm going to go ahead and do is kind of similar to what I did on episode 0, but different. I'm going to go back. I'm going to rewatch a lot of the old BooTV episodes, and I'm going to elaborate a bit more on a few things from my perspective. So, just pull up the good old YouTubes here, and I'll be getting right back to you on episode 1. Alright, so I kind of skimmed through the first episode because Jesus fucking Christ. I remembered that we did almost an hour's worth on that, but fucking forgot about it until I just went back and decided I'm gonna watch all these. Basically, I'm coming up to like watching a full-length fucking movie and reviewing it. The first episode is actually really interesting because you can kind of see us trying to get our footing, and we're still trying to do that. It kind of began with the whole character that I'm playing on there too, which you can probably tell I'm dropping during the BooTalk episodes. It's just easier to be myself when I'm not in front of a camera. I'm just sitting in front of a microphone right now. But the character that I'm playing is kind of a dick, and I love it. Where I'm making jokes about things that, you know, personally I have no problems with. Like, Canadians, yeah, no big problem there, but I find it funny to pretend like I hate them. You know, stupid shit like that. And we also got into a little bit of our history. I'll go a little bit more into that for me. The BooTV episode went into it pretty in depth on how I started, but just to go a bit further in, you know, it's interesting to look back on my career in the haunted house business. I started out just a 15-year-old boy. You know, I had just gotten into some trouble that I shouldn't have gotten into, and I found a haunted house. Again, my mom got mad at me for scaring away trick-or-treaters, so I went to work for a haunted house where you're supposed to scare people. And I was god-awful. Like, I'm pretty sure everyone was god-awful when they first started. I always say if I could go back in time to October 1st, 2010, which was the first day I ever haunted, if I could go back to that point in time and see the shit that I was doing then, I would beat the shit out of myself. Like, it was bad. Things that I thought were scary were not scary, but that was where I started. And, you know, just to go through, I've created some really compelling characters, at least in my eyes. I went through and I started off with a character named Edios, It was a stupid name in retrospect. A very stupid name. Very creative on the way I formed it together. I can't remember if I've ever talked about this on the show before, but I'm a ventriloquist, which means I can talk without moving my lips, and I make dolls and puppets talk. And Edios was taking the word ventriloquist and using every other letter in the word ventriloquist, and it's spelled E-T-I-O-U-S, Etios. It was, again, stupid fucking name, but it worked, and I rolled with it. And then I got the puppet. I was given the puppet as a way to pay me for what I had been doing that season. She was an $80 puppet. She was a puppet that I had wanted for years, and the haunt that I worked for just so happened to have her there. And I was working for free. I was a volunteer. I was a volunteer. So in order to pay me for my volunteer work, they just gave me the puppet because they knew that I wanted her. And that was the beginning of Edios and Nocturna, which was my very first ventriloquist character, which is how I got started. Which brings me to a funny, well, not funny, but it brings me to a very important lesson that I learned from a man that I'm not very okay with anymore. I won't mention his name, but, let's just move on past that. But he did give me some very, very good advice when it comes to haunted house working. I was looking around on my very second day of working at a haunted house. I did one night, and I went the next night, and they paired me up with this guy. And I was looking around at all these people who knew what they were doing, and they were phenomenal actors. And I looked at the guy that I was paired with that night, and I just looked at him and said, I don't want to mimic them. I don't want to encroach on their territory. I don't want to pretend to be them, but I want to know, how do you be like them? How do you get noticed? How do you get to be a different sort of actor? How do you get to be rememberable? And what he told me is something that I've told others since, and without that advice, I hate to say it, but without that advice, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. And he told me, find something you can do that not everyone can, and do it. And do it well. Now, I like I said, I was a ventriloquist, and I had never done horror ventriloquism. I always tried to do ventriloquism for comedy, and I was not funny. Then again, I tried this when I was like in middle school, and when you're a middle school comedian, they expect you to do kid jokes. I was not doing kid jokes. So I gave up on the comedy thing because, people were expecting me to do stuff that I wasn't doing, that I didn't want to do, and I gave up on it. But then this came around, and I started doing horror ventriloquism. And it was about starting from my first year doing haunts. It was either 2 or 3 years that I consistently worked with her, the puppet. And things just worked out for me. I was the puppet guy. A lot of people would look at me and they'd say the same things that I was saying about the other people my second night. How do I do that? How do I, not encroach on his territory, but how do I be noticed? And the same advice was always given. Find something you can do that not many can, and do it. Anyone can do ventriloquism, but not everyone does. So I found that, and I did it. But then I got a little bored of the character that I was doing and the room that I was in, because I was in that room about 2.5 years, I believe, and I was getting bored of it. So we were doing training sessions before the season even started, and I forgot my puppet at home. And I don't remember how this happened. I feel like if I had known we were going to be doing dry runs, I would have brought her with me. But I think the we were doing a dry run of everything that we were doing caught me off guard. So I don't think I knew it was happening. And I didn't have the puppet. Now keep in mind, up until this point, I had no acting experience. I have never acted for anyone. I was never a theater person in school. I had just done it for Halloween. So I go in and I'm freaking out because they want us to try to make up our face. Even if you're not a makeup artist, they wanted you to try your hand at it. And they wanted you to go in, find a room that you wanted to work, and work it. Now, the place that I was at the time, there was the place called the doll room, and I've always wanted to work the doll room, and it never made sense to me as to why the guy with the puppet didn't work the doll room, but I wanted to try my hand at it. But I was also fucking petrified, because up until this point, the puppet was a crutch for me. I used her as a kind of like a safety blanket for me to get through a night. Without the puppet, I felt naked. I felt like I didn't have anything to my name. And I got some other very important advice, but then again, this advice probably only pertains to me. I can't imagine ever saying this to somebody else. And I went up to one of the more senior actors there, and I told them that I don't know what I'm gonna do without the puppet. And he basically told me that I've been using her as a crutch, and said, if you don't have the puppet, be the puppet. So I did. I made up my face to kind of look like a puppet, and I went into the doll room, and I fucking sucked. I did terrible, but it was the beginning of something. My directors came up to me and they said, hey, so we have this idea for a new character of yours, and I was completely against this. When I first started, I wanted to have my character, and I stuck with that character, and I was going to be that character until I retired. Obviously, now that hasn't panned out, and this is partially due to what I'm about to say. They came up to me and they said, we want you to try a different character. We like the puppet idea, but we want you to kind of do like a Scarface thing from Batman, where the puppet controls you. So they were going to buy me a ventriloquist dummy, not just like a Muppet puppet, which is what I had been working with up until that point, but they were going to buy me a ventriloquist dummy, and they wanted me to dress up exactly like the puppet and have the puppet control me. That was interesting, and I immediately, it caught my attention, and I entertained the idea. Well, weeks and weeks and weeks went by, and they still had no dummy. I looked up ventriloquist dummies to try to get one myself, but keep in mind I'm only 16 at this point. I don't really have any money to my name. And I look up these puppets, and they're fucking expensive. Like, I have one ventriloquist dummy now, and that one I can't even really use because he's from Goosebumps. It's Slappy. And he only cost me like $200. I'm saying only $200 because if you wanted a more original ventriloquist dummy, you're looking at thousands of dollars. And that's just at the bare minimum of them. Like, just a moving jaw. If you want moving eyebrows and moving eyes and other moving parts, you're going to be paying like $10,000 for a dummy. So it makes sense why they didn't get one. But they didn't get one, and I was too young and broke to afford one. So I started reworking the idea in my head, and the advice that I was given, be the puppet, rang in my ears. And the idea became that I was going to be a man who was obsessed with toys and dolls and puppets, and was going to turn people into toys and dolls and puppets as if they were to bring them back from the dead or anything like that. And that spiraled into one of my most beloved characters, which is Dr. Marionette. I was him for, I believe, 3 or 4 years. And I fucking loved him, and I still do. And I look for every opportunity to bring him back. And then that was the beginning of something else different for me. This was the beginning of me going out on my own, feeling comfortable without a puppet. And I was still using the puppet crutch because I was the puppet, but it was leading me out of that crutch. I didn't need the puppet anymore, because through one way or another, I looked like a puppet. I'm controlling myself as a puppet, and then eventually I was able to just control myself without ever viewing myself as a puppet. And that worked tremendously in my favor, and people noticed Dr. Marionette. He had a very distinctive vocal characteristic about him, very unnatural, and eventually ended up having Dr. Marionette take over the introduction after Lucian Holmes left, as I covered in BooTV. And then again, from that point forward, we were going into hotel territory, which I've already covered on BooTV, but I'll briefly go over it, where I decided that I wanted to leave, and there were 2 other haunts that I was looking at to go to, and decided against, and in favor of going to hotel. And then they asked me to do introduction. They wanted me to be a figurehead, a manager type character, and I evolved into the owner, Thomas Gribbins. On top of that, it's, those are my 3 main, characters that I came across. But there's so many others that I've made in between all of them ever since then. Because once Dr. Marionette was made, and my decision to just have one character was broken, I let my creative juices flow and created others. And some of them were born out of necessity, and some of them were born out of boredom. I'll name 2 or 3 right now, which, first off, I was bored one night. We were doing something called the Hell Week, and this was my 2nd year, I believe. Yes, this is my 2nd year, and I had just made Dr. Marionette. I was bored because we were doing something called Hell Week, which was we were going to be open Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And that's on top of the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday prior to that Monday. So we were working 9 nights, 10 nights in a row. And it got to that Monday, and nobody's going to a haunted house on a Monday. And I was bored. That's literally the only thing I could say, is I was bored. So I went to the acting directors at the time, because our normal directors weren't there that night. Well, they were, but they weren't directing, they were acting. And so I went to the active directors, and we had just gotten a bunny costume that was used years before I was even there. And I went up to them and I said, I'm bored, can I put on the bunny costume? I want to be the bunny. And they told me the kind of stuff that I would have to do as the bunny, and I agreed to do it and put it on. And then there was other actor who I'm still working with to this day, and I still give him shit over this. And he was playing a hunter type character and ended up chasing me and hunting the giant rabbit. So I went out, and we decided to entertain the line outside because we were slowly forming a line even on this Monday. We just weren't letting anyone in, so there was a little bit of a line. We went out to go entertain them. So I go out there, and I'm being chased by this guy whose name was Panama Jack, and then another guy who was wielding a chainsaw. They were both hunting me. And we went out, and I kind of juked them a little bit, and then I ran past them. This is where the problem comes in. There was a very severe defect in this costume that nobody was able to notice, not even myself. It covered up part of my eyes. So like the corners, the inside corners of my eyes right around my nose were being covered up. I couldn't see straight down the middle, but my eyes were adjusting to the point where like I couldn't notice that I couldn't see straight down the middle. So I had a blind spot, but my eyes were filling in what would be there. So I'm running away from these guys because we just finished what we were going to do, and we're going to go back in the house and we're going to have some fun. Little did I know, I can't see what's straight ahead of me. And what's straight ahead of me is a pole. I ran full throttle into that pole, not being able to see it. I didn't actually even hit the pole. There was 2 bolts that stuck out of the pole that hit me right on the top left of my mouth, right below my nose. And then there was another bolt that hit me on my chin. And I hit that top bolt so hard it shattered my bones up in my mouth and pushed out my front tooth, root and all, and chipped off half of my other front tooth. I, in that moment, still couldn't see that pole, and to me, I had just ran into an invisible wall, and I passed out for probably like 10 to 15 seconds. In that moment, when I was passed out, I was just kind of sitting there in blackness. And I remember thinking, oh my god, I'm dead. How did I die? I couldn't fathom how it happened. You know, maybe I got shot. I didn't know. I just thought I was dead. And then I woke up, and the 2 guys that were chasing me were now above me. And they asked me if I was okay, and I felt around in my mouth a little bit, and I just looked up, and I have no idea how they understood what I said, but I looked at them and I said, I think I'm missing a tooth. And they said, oh shit, and carried me into the makeup room. That was a reputation that I did not outlive for a very, very long time. As the guy who dressed up as a bunny and ran headfirst into a pole and knocked out his teeth. But it doesn't end there. I continued on after going to the hospital that night and then getting sent home, my mouth swelling, my mouth in a lot of pain. I was unable to eat solid foods because all of my teeth were knocked loose. So, you know, it was straight mashed potatoes and pudding for me, basically, for months at that point. But I came back the next day. I showed up and nobody expected me to be there after what had happened the night before. And I showed up and I said, I don't want to act. I just want to be here. I just want to be here. And they said, okay. So I went over to another one of the actors who wasn't acting that night but was just there, kind of helping out in the background, and I asked her to do me a favor. I asked her to go to take me to KFC so that I could order some mashed potatoes, because that's all I could eat and I was hungry. And she agreed, and keep in mind, I'm still only like 16, 17 at this point. So, yeah, she agreed and let me do it. And I went, and everyone, they opened up the house. They even used me as an example. They said, look, you know, he's still here after knocking out his fucking tooth. You ain't got any excuses to complain about anything, which I don't necessarily fully agree with, but I thought it was funny. But I got bored again. I finished my mashed potatoes, and I was bored. So I looked at them, and I said, you're going to think I'm crazy. And they looked back at me, and I said, I want to act. And the guy that I told this to just turned white as a ghost. Because the last time I had asked him a question somewhat like this, I ended up in the hospital with 1.5 missing teeth. And he said, if you feel up to it, go for it. Go back. But I didn't have any of my character stuff with me. At that point, I still only had the 2 characters, Idios Nocturna and Dr. Marionette. And I couldn't be any of them, because if I did ventriloquism with Idios Nocturna, you could see my tongue moving because I have a hole in my teeth. And I couldn't be the doctor because he wore a mask that was so tight on my face it would have hurt really bad to be him. So instead, I went back and looked at some of the costuming we had, and I hated all of it. I hated every one of them. I didn't want to be any of it. But then I looked down and I noticed that I was in a leather jacket. And then I reached in that leather jacket and I had a toboggan in there. And I just put that on real fast. And I came out, and the first thing I said, because I had to come out from behind a curtain too. Our costuming area was behind a curtain. So I came out from behind the curtain and I looked at him and I said, "Hey, what's going on? It's Toothless Jack." And his only reaction was, "What have we done?" And I told him I didn't want to put any makeup on because I didn't want to scrub it off at the end of the day with my face being the way it was. And he said, "You can scare somebody with that missing tooth, go for it." So that's what we did, and I went in and I started to act as Toothless Jack. And then somebody gave the bright idea for him to carry around a crowbar, and now Toothless Jack, or Jack as he's now known because I no longer can remove my tooth, but Jack now wields a crowbar, and he has become a pretty iconic character of mine too. More comedy, but people like him. And I still bring out Jack every now and again. But then there's one more. And that's the Shadow. That was another one born out of me just trying to test myself. You know, I got to a point now where I'm feeling comfortable acting on my own, and I'm more comfortable testing myself and trying to push myself. And I was doing the introduction at the first place I worked at after Lucian had left, and just plain and simple, I was bored. I didn't want to do it. So I came up with a new character. I had been talking as characters for so long. I wanted to test my mettle and see if I could scare people without talking. So I created a character completely centered around movement. Me crawling on the ground, slow, methodical, twitchy movements. And it was very fun to do, and I'm looking to bring him back as well. There's really nothing more in-depth I can go into with him, because it's not like I fucking ran into a pole and lost my teeth with this guy. But it is interesting just to bring up, I'm looking back at myself, and at one point I was afraid to test myself. I was afraid to step away from the puppets. And then there I was, saying, here's something I've never done before, and I'm gonna do it. And I've done that since then too. I'm a bigger guy. I'm not really the type of person you'd expect to climb walls. So when the opportunity arose for me to go into a room for a night with walls that I may be able to climb, I said I'm gonna do it. I started off terrified, petrified of getting out of a comfort zone. And then once that was broken, I was free. And I was willing to do whatever I had to do. That is very liberating to think about. And I'm going on a fucking tangent right now about... And we're still just on the first episode. We still got like 3, 4 other... Yeah, we got 4 others to do. Fantastic. Well, hopefully we won't be going as in-depth with some of these other ones. But with that said, I'm going to go ahead and either watch or skim through BooTV Episode 2, Misconceptions. Alright, so I just finished skimming through Episode 2. I actually watched a good portion of it without skipping through. But this was interesting to go back on. And episode 2 and 4 are kind of similar, so I might have some similar things to say about those. But with episode 2, we went into Fear Fair at first, which was a lot of fun. I love Fear Fair. You know, going back to where I was raised in haunting, the place that I started out in, they weren't very inclusive to other haunts, so I never really checked out other haunts. And then by the time that I got ready to check out Fear Fair and all of them, you know, I was very, very surprised at how good they are and how nice they are as people towards other actors. I was just very pleasantly surprised, and it's always a fun time to go see them. So whether you're going for like their special shows or their normal show, I would always recommend Fear Fair. They're just a blast to go through. So, but after that, we went into talking to Mr. Snuggles of Clown Lives Matter. And now, admittedly, the subject matter was a little bit dated by the point that we're covering it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's still not pertinent. Like, the whole clown thing was going on maybe about a year ago, maybe a little longer than that by now. Fuck, I can't remember. But, you know, there were people dressing up as clowns and trying to scare people and making people think that they were going to kill them, and then maybe there were, I never did enough research into this, but maybe there were more that actually were hurting people, and that became a problem, which got them to start Clown Lives Matter. So that was interesting to talk to Mr. Snuggles about that a little bit. Again, the subject matter is a little dated at this point, but it's still pertinent. It's still applicable to everything going on now. So, but after that we went into some misconceptions, and again, the clown thing was very good for this, because we were going in, and there are actors out there who, and I don't want to say this as a mean way, undoubtedly this is going to sound mean, and undoubtedly this is going to be mostly true for some clown actors out there, but not all of them. So keep that in mind. But some people out there have used the clown thing as a crutch, kind of like I did with puppets. And that is their thing. That is not something they should be ashamed of. You know, if I stuck with being the puppet guy, the one that worked with puppets all the time, the one that, you know, you see me as a different character but with a puppet and you know it's still me, you know, as long as I'm still delivering a good show, that's nothing to shame me over. It's the same thing with some of these clowns. You know, some of a lot of them probably are actors that can do other things if they really, really wanted to, but they specialize in being a clown. Some of them are actual circus clowns that then become horror clowns during haunted house season. You know, some of them are professional horror clowns, and some of them are professional clowns. And the press that they were getting was very negative. And in some cases, life-threatening to them. The amount of posts that I would see from people just on Facebook around that time saying they see a clown, they're going to shoot him in the face, was stupid. Like, really stupid. Because, again, you got these people out there just doing their jobs, doing what they love, and now they have to worry about getting shot or stabbed just because they are who they've been. Because of a few bad apples or because of bad press. You know, that's misconceptions right there. And the same thing kind of applies when it comes to haunted house actors. You know, the amount of times that people think that I'm like into some really bad shit just because I'm a haunted house actor, you obviously don't pay attention to what I'm doing, if you think that about me. You know, I don't know if I've mentioned this on the show before, but I am one to go in and try and convey a very important message, again, pertaining to the whole thing with misconceptions and everything like that. I am giving you a moral to the story. That is something I've always believed pretty deeply on. That something should be learned from something. And I'm conveying it in a very macabre manner. But I'm conveying it. So pay attention. Like, I may be trying to scare you, but I may be also trying to teach you something. And, you know, it's just important to think about. You know, there's other misconceptions out there, but that's, you know, most of them kind of fall under that umbrella. The haunters are bad people, and I covered this in the episode that I just watched, where I mentioned that some of the best people I've ever known work for haunted houses. They're lifelong friends of mine. You know, some of them more than friends, family. And I'd never give that up. You know, they're not terrible people. We're not terrible people. We pretend to do terrible things, but it all serves a purpose. You know. I don't really know where else I can go with that, so I guess I'll move on to the last point I wanted to make. Episode 2 was where I first started doing the beer chug, which that proves to be fun when we record multiple episodes in a row, because then I'm chugging multiple beers over the course of maybe 30 minutes in between each one of them. So that's fun. But let's move on to episode 3, Down Horror Road. This is where we're going to start trying to convince me to watch horror. Alright, I'm back from skimming through episode 3 a bit, and that was the one where we tried to convince me a bit more about horror as opposed to Halloween. I like horror-themed things. I'm still not very big on horror movies, and it all boils down to the same thing. The few horror things I've seen are typically very jump scare heavy, and I hold the same mentality for horror movies that I do for haunted houses, that I think jump scares are very, very cheap. They are very necessary. They are very useful. But when something relies too much on them, it turns me off. If I go through a haunted house, which I have been through one, that very plainly sticks out in my mind, and I will not name it, but literally all it was people jumping out, screaming, and then going back into a door where they jumped out of. And I was so turned off by this haunted house. I was so excited to go see it because it had been hyped up for me so much, and then I get there and I hated it. I didn't like it at all. And then when I got to the few actors that would do something other than jump out and scream and then jump back, I really, really enjoyed them. Now, their performance may not have been phenomenal, but compared to what I had been seeing the minutes before I had seen them, they seemed phenomenal, and I loved them. That's probably a complaint they get quite often, and after thinking about it, I understand why they operate the way they do, but it doesn't change the fact that it wasn't something that really rubbed me the right way. I was not a fan of it. And I hold the same mentality with horror movies. If you're going to jump scare me all the time, I'm not going to want to watch it. I want to feel dread. I want to feel suspense when I'm watching these things. And the jump scares can be a payoff, but not 100% of the time. Make me feel the dread, and then make the dread pay off without the jump scare. You will get a jump out of me, still. probably, even without a jump scare. You don't need loud noises to do that kind of stuff. And Michael did a really good job of picking clips to show me of films that didn't rely at all, basically, on jump scares. So, he did start to sway me a little bit. I'm still not convinced, but he has swayed me a little bit. To try to give some more horror movies some tries. Now, I'm going to maintain my stance. They jump scare me too much, I will turn it off, because it's not, at that point it's not worth my time. They're not trying hard enough, in my opinion, if that's all they're going to do. So I'd turn it off, and then I'd go find something else that's not going to jump scare me all the time, something else that's going to entertain me, that's going to mess with my emotions. Then I will watch that. But then we talked, before all that actually, we talked about some movies that some people consider to be horror movies, one of which is a horror movie that I have seen, and that is if you count them, Repo the Genetic Opera, Devil's Carnival, and Devil's Carnival Alleluia. I love those movies. They are very horror themed. Personally, I wouldn't say they're horror movies, unless you're going to count horror-themed movies as horror movies. But they are horror-themed. Like, I've loved those movies for a while at this point now. Their songs get stuck in my head all the time, and I'm always listening to their soundtrack. It's amazing. It's something that I love to delve into every now and again. And I keep hearing they're going to make a Devil's Carnival 3, and I'm hoping they're going to make a Devil's Carnival 3, just because, like, they took the first one and then decided, hey, we can do more with this, and then did more with it in 2, and there's so much more they can still do with it. So, if they can turn it into a third movie, that'd be fantastic. And if you've never watched or listened to Repo the Genetic Opera or either of the Devil's Carnivals, I strongly recommend you watch them. They used to be on Netflix, or at least Devil's Carnival used to, and it's not on there anymore. So I think the only way really you're gonna get to watch it is if you go on, I believe it's on Amazon Prime, but if it's not on that, I know it's on like the Google Play Store. You can buy them and watch them from there. Or you can go to their websites and just buy them from there, like the actual physical releases, I believe. You can get them shipped to your house and then watch them, because they're phenomenal movies. They're phenomenal. And then something else, if you want to get a taste of what Devil's Carnival can be, man, there's a free option for you just to get a taste of what it is. If you want to go on YouTube, or you may be watching this on YouTube because I'm starting to release these on YouTube now. But you can go on YouTube and look up look up American Murder Song. It's not a song you're looking up. American Murder Song is the name of the channel or the group or whatever you want to call them. But it's from the people who brought us Genetic Opera and the Devil's Carnivals. And what they do is they take horrific things from American history and sometimes they warp them, but they're turning them into music. And those songs get stuck in my head a lot now too. And the one guy that everyone thinks about when they think Devil's Carnival and Repo, Terrence Zedunge or something like Terrence, the guy who plays the Gravedigger and Genetic Opera, and the guy who plays the Devil in the Devil's Carnivals, is one of the main voices of American Murder Song. And when you hear his voice, he is great. And we actually have an episode of BooTV that's been recorded but not edited yet that will lightly go over American Murder Song a little bit. But if you want to know what I'm talking about, here's a brief clip that is so brief that it should prevent copyright.
There's a note on the lean-to gate. Wow, wow, ooh, ooh, ooh. All you little hungries come in for a bite, but every mother knows, hold your children tight. Oh, somebody's always cooking something in the lean-to. If you have to go out, take a gun and a lamp, 'cause everybody knows there's a devil in camp.
See what I mean? See? It's so good. I love their music. I cannot recommend it enough, especially to people who like horror. And both American Murder Song, Devil's Carnival, not both, but all three, Genetic Opera, Devil's Carnival, and Murder Song, they all have a great horror feel to them. Even though they're not horror, they have a great horror feel, and that is enough in some people's books, and even partially in my books, to consider them to be horror products. And then I talked a little bit about magic. Now, I believe there are other movies I've seen out there that are horror movies that I may have enjoyed, but I can't remember them. And the only one that I do remember is Magic by William Goldman. That is a movie that I found from a book, actually. When I was in high school, we had to write reading journals about things that we were reading and evaluate them, kind of. And turn our journals into our teacher and have him say, okay, grade it, that kind of stuff. Well, I have a real hard time reading things because I like to be gripped by a story and held. You have to hold me to a story. And not a lot of books will do that. They'll hold me at first and then they'll lose me and then I never come back. And they're losing me at points where you're supposed to be able to push through and then get gripped again, but they'd lose me too fast. But I was with he was my arts and humanities teacher, and I was telling him about that because he was also an English teacher. He wasn't my English teacher, but he was an English teacher, and I was telling him that I was having such a hard time finding books that would just grip me. And he knew that I was a ventriloquist. He knew I worked for haunted houses, and he said, I have a book for you. And he said, I don't have it physically, but you can look it up, you can try to find it, and I feel like this book would be great for you, and it should be able to hold your attention, and you should be able to use it for your reading journals. And he told me Magic by William Goldman. And I asked him why, and he said because it's about a ventriloquist, and it's a horror book. That's pretty much all he told me. But that was enough to get me to want to read this. So we went, I was still pretty young at the time, didn't really have any money to my name. Either that, or I may have started working for Papa John's at that point, in which case I didn't have a whole lot of money to my name. And then I went on Amazon. I think I found it for like a penny, plus shipping and handling, but the price was like a penny. And bought it and read it and fell in love with it. The book starts out and it's like a diary. And you're wondering what the fuck is going on, because this guy Fats is talking about his friend Corky, and Corky's losing it, and he's real concerned about Corky. And then eventually this diary entry starts turning into like murder investigation logs. Like they're finding these diary pages and they're putting them into the police vault of evidence for murder investigations, and you're wondering what the fuck is going on. And then at one point, I don't remember if it still sticks with the diary entries at this point, but it starts giving you chapters, but the chapters aren't chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The chapters are characters' names. And they start telling you about these characters, mostly from Corky's backstory. And you learn about these characters, and you grow to know Corky a bit more, and it still makes you think what the fuck is going on, because I do believe it continues the format of the diary entries at this point. and you're so confused at what is going on, and that is holding my attention at that point. And then you get halfway through the book. This takes half of the book, and then the story starts, and that's when you realize some of what actually is going on. Fats, who is the one that has been writing these diary entries, is not the ventriloquist. He is not even a person. He's a puppet. And Corky is the ventriloquist. So you've been reading a puppet's diary entries about his ventriloquist this whole time. And then the story begins. And it goes on, and in order not to ruin the movie, because the movie picks up halfway through the book, at where the actual story starts, so I don't want to ruin the movie just in case you plan on going to it. I may have just ruined like half the book for you, but it should still be a fun read if you decided to read it. And honestly, Magic is one of the most faithful book to movie adaptations I've ever seen in my life, because it only goes for half the book. It doesn't have all that extra stuff that it needs to try to adapt and change and shorten, because the book has so much more content in it, and then it makes the movie feels more cheap. They just removed half the book, all that extra added backstory, which honestly you don't need to know, but is helpful to know. They remove it, and they just start you where the book story starts. And then from that point forward, there's pretty much just enough book in there to fit the entire story of the book into the movie. And it's great. And then once I finished the book, I found out that there was a movie about it, and I had to see it. Like, I didn't care that it was horror, and at that point I really hadn't watched anything horror. I didn't care. I needed to see this movie. When I watched it, I was so surprised, in a good way, that it was everything that I needed in a horror movie. It was psychological. It was suspenseful, but it was never jump scary, and it just felt perfect to me. I love Magic by William Goldman, and I cannot recommend it enough to enough people, because it's not very well known, even with Anthony Hopkins, Burgess Meredith, and Anne Margaret as the three main roles. It is not that well known. So the more people that watch this movie or read the book, the better, in my opinion. Episode 4 was a more recent recording, so I didn't really need to go too far into it. I just kind of skimmed through. You know, we covered Granny Four Barrel and went in and talked about freaks and the definition of freak. And, you know, as we were recording this, I realized that we don't really use the term freak as often as it used to be used, and not really as negatively as it used to be used. That's kind of where the tone of the episode kind of shifted. You know, no doubt there are still people out there that are going to say that person's a freak and mean it in a very negative way, but it's not nearly as predominant as what it used to be, in my opinion. Being a freak now is kind of something to be proud of, from my understanding, from my observations of everything. I don't mind being called a freak. In some cases, I probably prefer it. So, you know, that kind of derailed the episode towards the end of it. I recognized as watching it back, but it was something that I recognized and I had to point it out. Granny Four Barrel, though, she was very interesting to talk to. I'm going to call her a she, but I'm calling her a she by her character, you know, if you know anything about Granny Four Barrel. But admittedly, I'd never heard of her before. And since the episode, I hadn't really listened to her that much. I did listen to a couple of songs to prepare for the episode, and I really enjoyed them. Like, I'm surprised I'd never heard of them before, but they were really, really good, and I really like their Freak Flag song. It was very appropriate for the episode, and Granny Four Barrel's interpretation of freak, it's interesting, because again, I'm saying that people don't really use it as negatively as they used to, and for me, that just kind of reinforces what Granny Four Barrel is doing. Because what if she never did this? And if you don't know what I'm talking about, Granny Four Barrel likes to go and try to redefine the word freak, make it something to be proud of. Basically, being a freak just means you're an individual. And for the most part, that's what people think now. And you gotta wonder if Granny herself, if that is something that is due to her and other people like her. If she never tried to do this, maybe we would still be calling people freaks in a bad way. I'm starting to thinking back on everything now, that she was successful in what she has set out to do, and she's still doing it. Because like I said, there's bound to be people out there who still view people as freaks and mean it as a negative way. So Granny is out there trying to change people's minds, still. Even though I would argue that she has already succeeded, she's still doing it. But, again, I haven't really listened to her that much prior to this episode. And, even after the episode, but I need to. I really need to. After I'm done recording this, I will probably go ahead and listen to some more, and I'll throw in a clip here. I like Freak Flag so much, though, so I'm probably going to choose Freak Flag.
Just let your freak flag fly. No time to hesitate. Just live before you die. Come join the feast. You're a beautiful beast. You show me yours and I'll show you mine.
And again, non-copyrighted. Alright. But again, freaks, it's so similar to misconceptions that I really don't know what else to cover with it. Again, it doesn't seem as negative as it used to. It's something that most people, me included, are proud to say we are now. And when you say you're a freak now, a lot of people, they'll just be like, alright, good for you. Even if they don't think it's something that you should be proud of, they just basically be like, good for you. Okay. It's interesting. That's all. There's a lot of misconceptions out there. And some of them are about people being freaks. No longer is it something that you should be ashamed of. And lastly, we're coming to BooTalk. Nope, not BooTalk. Told you I'd get this mixed up. Lastly, we're coming to BooTV episode 5, Paranormal Part 1. Part 2 is on BooTalk. It's not as... If you're watching the video version, it's not as highly edited, just because it's primarily an audio format, so it's not that big of a deal for me to do that. You're just mainly supposed to listen to it. That's why it's offered as a podcast. But episode 5 of BooTV was edited a bit more than what part 2 was, to be more visually appealing. But on there, we got to meet up with the Kentucky Podcast Massacre guys. Now, since we met up there, they've gone on a bit of a hiatus. I don't really have that much of an inside scoop on them, and I don't know how much of that they want me to tell. But they're phenomenal people. I've loved listening to them. I loved getting to meet up with them and do a recording with them. We were going to do an episode on their show. It kind of fell through. And that's when their hiatus went into effect. But it's so fun to talk to them because they really know what they're fucking talking about. I'm kind of just feeling my way through a dark room when it comes to this kind of shit. They know their shit. So they're a lot of fun. And some of the stuff we've talked about on there, and basically wanting to go, after talking about every subject we talked about on the episode, both part 1 and 2, we came to the same consensus that we wanted to all wanted to do this together. We all wanted to go to those places, and man, would I fucking love to do that. We ain't got the listener or watcher base to do that yet, but man, would I fucking love it. To be able to go to Waverly with these guys and try to do some sort of investigation, or, Bobby Mackey's, that'd be so much fucking fun to go do. Or even Pope Lick, because they've been to Pope Lick before, and that'd be interesting for me, again, because I have some childhood history with Pope Lick. But for paranormal, I want to go a little bit into what I briefly covered it on the show. But when you have how many? We had 5 people there, all talking and drinking at the same time. So every now and again you can get cut off, and I started to explain myself a little bit, and I believe I got cut off. I don't remember. But my stance when it comes to the paranormal is I don't know what's true and what's not. I'm a man who likes evidence to back things up. If there's the evidence there for it, I believe it. If there's not, then I don't believe it. I'm gonna avoid religion here, but I'm going to very briefly cover that. That's the reason I'm not a religious man. I don't see any sort of... I don't see any evidence for it. And I know there's people out there that are going to say that there is evidence, but there's been no evidence presented to me. But that's all I'm going to say about it. I can go much longer on that subject. I'm not going to. But I like evidence. And when it comes to the paranormal, things do pop up that you can't explain. And that's the problem. It's evidence that I can't explain. So how do you explain it? As a ghost or anything else? I'm not saying you can't, but what I'm saying is it's hard to. If something popped up that said, new evidence shows when you die, this is what happens. You become a ghost, and this is how, and this is why. Then yes, I will fully believe in the paranormal at that point. But as it stands, I believe there's something that we haven't discovered yet that makes these kinds of things happen. Not happened. But something we haven't discovered that makes these things happen. And without knowing what that is, it's hard for me to know what I believe. It's fun to talk about as if it's 100% absolute fact, but there's no way in my mind that I can say it's absolute fact. Now there's places that are harder to dispute, like Waverly, as even Kentucky Corey mentioned in the episode. Waverly, you basically have to admit, is fact. Yeah, I agree. But the problem is, I have to admit it's fact, but not knowing why. So, and then you get to places like, Bobby Mackey's, where there's a lot of shit that goes on there. But if you really tried hard enough, you probably could dispute it. But when it comes to Waverly, yeah, there's shit that goes on. You kind of have to admit it's fact, but I don't know why I admit it as fact. And until that evidence pops up that says these are the things that happened, this is why people see and hear and investigate ghosts, and this is the proof that supports it. Now, I'm not just talking about paranormal investigations showing evidence, because that kind of stuff can always be fabricated, and even with the most reputable of sources, you have to take it with a grain of salt. But if you go in to a scientific study and they say, something along the lines of, when you die, your brain activity continues on, and that is ghosts, that would make sense to me. And if you put evidence to back it up, Suddenly, we now have scientific evidence that proves the paranormal exists. Granted, at that point, it no longer becomes paranormal, because paranormal is things you can't explain, and then you're explaining it. So, it would have to be called a different name, but it's fun to talk about as if it's absolute fact. But those are kind of my gripes with it. Not really gripes, but my difficulties with trying to believe those kinds of things. I want to, and in a lot of ways, I will try to rationalize it. If I can't rationalize it, it's fucking paranormal at that point. I can't explain it. Now, whether or not I'll explain it as a ghost or not, I don't know. But I certainly will say paranormal if it is unexplained. But regardless, again, it's so much fun to talk as if it's fact. So it's fun to talk about with those Kentucky Podcast Massacre guys, because they know their shit. And they're hilarious. Yeah, I don't think I've laughed that hard in a long time. So if you guys are listening to this, those of you from Kentucky Podcast Massacre, you guys were a fucking blast. And, I'd love to talk with you more, to be on with you more on your show, or have you guys on. I know we got Sean on board with us for a little while, helping us out while Kentucky Podcast Massacre is on hiatus. Surprisingly, we've kind of gone on a little hiatus as well, because Michael's not fucking doing any work. But, I just wanted to throw that out there. You guys were a blast. I enjoyed every second I spent with you guys. And I'd love to do it again. With that said, though, we are coming to the end of this first ever episode of BooTalk. Now, again, things didn't go quite the way I wanted it to. Things kind of fell through the cracks on everything I wanted to do. But in the long run, this may have been the better option, to go back and kind of do a brief retrospective. Even though the channel is very young right now, there's still leaps and bounds we've made just over the course of 5 episodes, and we hope to bring more in the future. More leaps, more bounds, better quality, everything. We hope to get as good as we possibly can to bring you things that we enjoy, so that hopefully you'll enjoy them as well. And, when we come back, should be a couple of episodes that will be released, and then, we'll get to, I believe we'd then go on another brief hiatus, because right now the hiatus is over Michael being wrapped up in work. When we come back, we'll have those episodes released, and then I believe another hiatus will come into play for us to try to formate a more solid format to bring you more consistent content. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But in the long run, this was probably the better option, to go back and look at some of the stuff we've done just over the short time we've been here. And it's been a blast. It's been a blast. Like, not to mention, we got a brand new fucking intro, which is 10 times better than what it used to be. Specifically because when we first started BooTV, I was just meant to be like a narrator. And then I ended up being on screen, so it really didn't make sense for me to narrate the opening to the episode when I was going to be on screen. So, that's kind of been retconned now. And the first 2 or 3 episodes had all that, and that was interesting to look at when we changed the intro. It's been fun to look back on not just BooTV, but on my haunt career as well. And I hope things were enjoyable for you as well. And, even when BooTV's not around, I'll try to keep BooTalk around as often as I possibly can to continue to bring you these kinds of videos, this kind of content, some more in-depth content. And if plans go the way they are supposed to right now, I have a very special episode planned next week. You've heard me talk on the show before that I play D&D, and I'm recording this right now on a Sunday, and I play D&D on Saturdays. And I met up with them, and I asked them if they would be willing to come on the podcast. and play a little game called Dread. It's an RPG horror game, tabletop horror game, that I believe will be a hell of a lot of fun. Not just for us, but for people who want to listen and watch too, because I'm going to try to get a video, get video recordings of us playing at the same time. I have no idea how that's going to work out. So we'll see. We'll see what happens, but I just wanted to let you know about Dread a little bit. And if that episode falls through, I'll find something else to do. But eventually, I will be bringing Dread here. So, with all that said, I believe I've rambled on for long enough. I want to thank you guys for listening and or watching, even though there's no... my face isn't on screen, but thank you for listening and or watching. And, without any further ado, stay spooky, my friends. Well, that's the end of this episode of BooTalk here on YouTube, but if you want to not have to open up the app on your phone, let it sit there, pull it up on your desktop and let it sit there, head on over to BooTalk.podbean.com to get it in audio format so that you can listen to it wherever you are without having to worry about any YouTube shenanigans.
Initiate fear chud sequence.